people say to me, did you ever think you'd get this big? I said, of course not. All we're trying to do is make a living. And we thought maybe make a nice living out of it. But never, you know, at the level of its head. Never this many people making so much for themselves. We have an army of people making very good money, you know, and that's the core of the leadership, because they've been rewarded, but they have risen to levels of leadership that many of them never thought they would. The first big one was to hit $1 million. I mean, to have $1 million company was just staggering to us. I remember one of the guys that worked here at that time, he said, someday we're going to be a $200 million business. And I called him in. I said, listen, you don't talk that way. You know, we have no idea we're ever going to be like that. Don't give us big numbers that may never happen, you know. I said, you know, we're just getting started. Yeah, he said, but I know, I think it's going to be a big business. And well, he was right. You know, sometimes you don't want to talk too much about where you're going to go until you get there a little bit farther. And the million was important because we then knew we had something that would work. And I think the $100 million was a big number. Nutrilite Company, where we had started and we're selling Nutrilite, never got over $25 million a year. We thought that was too huge. And, you know, survival is important in business, and so, you know, you celebrate survival. People think you celebrate an achieved level, and you do, but you're really kind of celebrating that you're still here. Because there's always in business an insecurity about how big and how far and how long will it go on. Of course, now we're getting in the 50s, so you pretty soon relax a little bit and say it's an institution now. It's institutionalized, its base is so strong, and the leadership in the field is strong, and they're committed, and so it keeps on going and keeps on growing. Now, it doesn't mean it'll always keep growing. We're bound to have a little downturn. We've had a big run again, and there's some things that'll slow it up, and then we'll get going again and find a new way to make it happen. And that's what happens when you have a frame of mind that you know the system is good and it works, and therefore you have that faith in it, and therefore you're in a mindset that we can make it bigger. And so when you think about making it bigger, then you get to doing things that make it bigger. And so we're fun talking with Doug about, you know, some big goals that we think are achievable, and moving this thing really on up into the big time. Bob Rooker. And Bob Rooker worked in the basement of my house. And then there was a Kay Evans who worked up at Jay's house as the secretary. In the early days, the first secretary was my wife, Helen, only because Helen could type and write a letter. Jay, if he wanted to do a letter, would come over to our house and put it on the machine, and then Helen would type it up. I mean, that's just, we didn't have anything else. We didn't have anybody else who knew how to type a letter. And so Helen put it to work to type the first letter. But Bob Rooker came as a part-timer. He worked for the gas company here in town. He'd come into my basement where I had the supply of Nutrilite and the early cosmetic stuff. And then he'd put up the orders and package them and ship them off to the distributors. In those days, each person carried an inventory. Today, we carry it all for them, and it's all done on the Quick-Start system of shipping direct to the customer. But in those days, we were the warehouse as well as the marketing. When you just see things aren't working, don't be afraid to really change some fundamental ways you do business. I was visiting with Dick yesterday, and Dick said when he was in charge of international, Jay and I kind of said, well, that's as far as we can go internationally. We have to change our plan if we go into other countries. We have to modify how we do things. And Dick said, I came in and talked to you guys and said, you know, let's just go ahead and see how we have to modify, but let's go and take the rest of the world. And so we'll adjust in each country as we have to. And we gave him license to start moving. And so he took that lead at that time, and he began to rebuild and get reinvigorated the international market. It meant moving into countries where we didn't speak the language. It meant where they had certain rules or laws that would prohibit certain products that didn't come in. Some countries wouldn't allow us to sell Nutrilite. Some countries still don't allow us to sell Nutrilite. They think it's a drug and so forth. But he would say, that's okay, then we sell what we can sell. But let's go after those markets anyway. And so he took the lead and built that into that we would adjust and adapt to our markets and still go after the business. He also pointed out an interesting thing. He said, remember all the other people that you were with in the beginning, they were all here before the company was. You were associated with them in Nutrilite, and then Amway was formed. But he said, everybody else in the world, the company was first, and then they came. And so they see the company in a whole different way than the people in the United States. And so we can market in a whole different way in the rest of the world. And our relationships are different in the rest of the world. And, you must not be afraid to change the old way to find a new and better way to survive. We all have fear when we speak in public. I talked yesterday, and therefore I have a restless night before. They say, come and speak, we want you to talk. I used to say, what do you want me to talk about? Well, I don't know, we just make us feel good. Give me an inspirational talk. Well, thanks, And I've often wanted to say, people say to me, I'm a motivating speaker. I say, what is that? Is that somebody who calls for action? Or what is motivating? It's so different to every people. Every person have a different idea of what motivation is. So I don't know if I'm a motivating speaker or not. I'm just a speaker who says what's on my heart and shows my concern. But more than that, I want to exude confidence that they can have because I have confidence, and I want them to grow up in the same confidence I have. To this day, I still start out trying to be clear about a subject. Instead, yesterday I could have just gotten up and talked about life and things, but I had to focus it around on building a positive community. That was my subject, and then you can wrap around it, but you have to have a subject, and you have to have illustrations, you have to have stories to verify what you're talking about. And you've got to be willing to talk about yourself generally, because talking about yourself are stories you know, and you don't need any notes. You're not reading about somebody else's story. You're telling your story. And when you tell your story, you're animated because you lived it. And you can talk about it. And, Christ, when he was on this earth, talked always in parables. They ask him a question, he said, well, let me tell you about the rich man and so and so. And he's often telling you a story with a point, illustrating, illustrate. I have preacher friends I talk to say, illustrate, give me more illustrations. I know that's hard, but that's part of the job. Find illustrations that make the story come alive. And when it's all over, I may forget everything else, but I remember your stories. What do you want me to talk about tonight? He said, inspire us. He said, talk about America. Talk about having your own business. Talk about that. I said, well, should I talk about the plan? He said, we can talk about the plan. We need you to talk about bigger things. And out of that came Selling America, you see. And one of the first speeches I ever made, there was a little accountant we had 40 employees. We had a nice little woman accountant who kept the books. And she said, I have a little woman's accountant group. Will you come and talk to us? It's not big, but would you come and talk? And that was the first time I'd ever made a speech in the outside world, I think. And I said, yeah. And then I thought, all the times I'd heard guys speak at luncheons and so forth, and all they do is find fault and tell me how great they are because they got an answer. That's all I hear. There's a problem in Washington and there's a problem here. And that seems to be the easiest thing to talk about. And it is easy to talk about. I decided I wasn't going to talk about that. I was going to talk about what was right about America. And I've been doing that ever since. And it was always, you can do it. We can do it. We can make this a better place. That's the theme of my life. And they helped me get started on that. And every speech I give kind of ends up with a you can do it concept. You're 80 years old. You've developed a lot of positions on things that you think are right or another legitimate viewpoint. And so you have something to say because you kind of have lived long enough to have a position. A lot of people have never taken a position other than being against something. That's easy. So that's what I do with all these distributors. Is you can do it. They're not sure they can do it, but we help them form an opinion about free enterprise. I work on those themes, and that's why on freedom and free enterprise. And when you go into freedom, the world is open to you to talk about it. The comparisons with the places in the world that don't have freedom versus those that do have freedom are staggering as to how much better your life is. So that's my theme. That's all about being better.